the transition from being a state senator to a congresswoman, and the short time, I mean, this time last year, she was campaigning to hope to be one, and now I are one, right? Mm-hmm. So, Sarah, when you want to say something there?
Yeah, absolutely. Can folks hear me? Is this even working? All right. I have a loud voice. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me again. It's great to be here with you, Fred, and Charlie. It's great to be here with former President Shabazz and former Senate Majority Leader Margaret Rose Henry, two longtime friends of mine. Thrilled to have them here. I'm obviously thrilled to have my parents here, who will, yeah.
And it's awfully early.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize we could have this at noon. That would have been a lot easier. And I'm thrilled to be back with all of you. I think this is my third time joining you all at the Wilmington Rotary. I was here as an advocate. I was here as a state senator in this room talking about paid family and medical leave. And now I'm honored to join you as Delaware's member of Congress. It is, let me just say, the professional privilege of my life to represent what we all know is objectively the greatest state in the history of the Union in Congress. Even, that's right. It's a privilege to even serve in this Congress, but it is a privilege to serve in Congress, and I just always want to start by saying thank you for entrusting me with this responsibility, and this responsibility particularly at this moment in our country, when it so often feels like politics at the national level is broken, and perhaps broken beyond repair, I think sometimes people feel. But I'm there because I believe it's not. I'm there because I believe that we still have the opportunity to build a government that respects everyone by not only treating people with respect, but by delivering for them. And Fred, when you ask, the change from being a state senator to a member of Congress, when I was running for this seat, I said that I would work with anyone who was willing to work with me to help Delaware, and that I'd stand up to anyone who I believed was hurting Delaware. That was my same philosophy in the state Senate. I would say that the ratio for either of those sides has changed pretty dramatically in my time in Congress versus my time in the state Senate. In the state Senate, whether you were a Democrat or Republican, I think were able to work responsibly and respectfully across disagreement and across the political divide. When we were in the state Senate, I believed we were moving forward positive policies that modernized Delaware's economy, that made us a more compassionate and competitive state. Right now, I obviously believe that there's a lot to defend in this moment. There's a lot to defend for Delaware, whether it's critical investments that are being cut off from our state. There's a lot to defend in terms of jobs here in Delaware. There's a lot to defend when it comes to health care for Delawareans or food assistance for Delawareans. But that other part of that statement, I will work with anyone who I believe will help Delaware, that remains true. And when I was in the state Senate, I was proud that nearly every bill that I introduced and passed with bipartisan support. And I'm proud that in just 9 months in Congress, one, I was the first freshman to introduce legislation this Congress. It was bipartisan legislation addressing scams against financially vulnerable individuals. And since then, I've introduced more bipartisan legislation than any other freshman in the House of Representatives. Now, despite what it feels like, there is still bipartisanship in Washington. The problem is it's not on the big issues, right? It's not the issues that make the headlines. It's not the issues that grab attention, because those are issues where the sort of perverse base incentives in our politics take hold, and the performative and provocative politics that we all see on the news and on social media when they bubble up. But on issues that are substantive and important but maybe don't grab the headlines, the issues that are outside of those political incentives that exist in this deeply competitive attention economy that we're in right now, on those issues, there's still the capacity to work across the political divide and work in a bipartisan fashion. And it's important to work on those issues because, one, those issues make a real difference. If we pass my legislation that I introduced a week after taking office, right now there's a pretty widespread abusive practice by so-called credit repair organizations that promise to essentially wipe your credit report clean on largely empty promises. And they charge these incredibly financially vulnerable people large upfront fees and don't do anything or fail to deliver or deliver in the short term with gimmicks. And my legislation, which I introduced with bipartisan support and continue to grow bipartisan support for it, would essentially end that practice. That would do a lot for the people who are being scammed right now. But the other reason why I continue to pursue those types of opportunities is because I believe that politics is fundamentally relational. And while the incentives in our politics, on TV and on social media, are pushing us apart on the big ticket items, we can maintain the capacity to overcome some of those incentives if, one, as elected leaders, we're willing to exercise some degree of courage. The easiest thing in politics is to just do what your supporters want every single time. Sometimes you have to buck the base incentives, and that means demonstrating some political courage. But that courage is a lot easier to summon if you also have relationships with the people on the other side. And working on these more technical but substantive bipartisan opportunities allows for me and my other colleagues to build those relationships. And look, I'm sure many of you have seen moments in Congress that have bubbled up onto the news with me and some of my Republican colleagues, where they maybe treat me with less respect than you would hope a member of Congress would be treated with. But those folks are the exception. They're the professional provocateurs. Yes, they influence politics. Yes, they get a lot of attention, but they're a fraction of Congress. And yeah, I'll still work with them if they want to work with me. I don't care. It's not about how I'm being treated. It's about how my constituents are being treated and what we're doing for them. But there are plenty of other people that I have very significant disagreements with, profound disagreements with. But if I can find an opportunity to work with them, to find common ground with them, I will, because that point of commonality is how we solve so many of the other problems in our politics. And there's just a lot more of that needed in Washington right now, and it's obviously a lot more difficult and requires arguably a lot more discipline and intentionality than it did in Dover when I was there.
Thank you. That's a lot of questions. Do you feel in one sense there's 435 members of Congress? Yeah. You're like a Lone Ranger from Delaware. Mm-hmm. Have you been able to connect, particularly with Maryland, to work together on some things that are good for all of us?
Well, I have a policy of not working with anyone from New Jersey, but but yes, because Congress is so large, I had to decide which state I was going to pick on there, and Jersey just felt like the easiest target. Because Congress is so large, we have a number of different ways that we organize ourselves in sort of subgroups. Obviously, you have the different party caucuses. But then within that, you still have more than 200 people in our caucus. You also have different ways of organizing us within that caucus. So one is you have a region. Our region is New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. And we work very closely together, particularly on things like committee assignments, because those are often divvied up on a number of factors, including region. We have ideological caucuses in the House Democratic Caucus. So there's essentially three. There's a very small, more sort of conservative Democratic caucus called the Blue Dog Caucus. There's a centrist caucus called the New Democrats Caucus, and then there's the Progressive Caucus. Like my predecessor, Lisa Blunt Rochester, I'm a member of both the New Democratic Caucus and the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I think it's important, since we have one person, that Delaware has a voice in both of those ideological caucuses. I'm very active, particularly with the New Democrats. I'm their co-chair. I'm the chair of their Care Economy Task Force. You all know I'm very passionate about paid leave and childcare, and so I'm doing a lot of work in that space with them. And then there's identity-based caucuses, the Congressional Black Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, LGBT Caucus, Women's Caucus. I'm a member of 2 of those. And those different subgroups allow us to, one, have more intimate conversations. It allows for a small state to contribute in a meaningful way. And I will say, Maryland in particular, I've gotten close with. And on the first day of freshman orientation, all the freshmen were gathered in their different sort of state little cliques. And I went over to Maryland and I said, "Can you guys adopt me?" and so I've stayed very close with the Maryland delegation in particular, but I work also very well with Chrissy Houlihan and Mary Gay Scanlon, who are the representatives from Delaware and Chester counties. We actually just did recently a tour of the Brandywine River watershed to discuss both clean water and flood mitigation efforts. And so we work very closely together. We've got a good relationship. And I'll say the final thing, the thing that gets me often a lot of attention is obviously a double-edged sword. It results in some not so nice things coming my way. But I have always felt like, whether I was a state senator or Delaware's member of Congress, that my job was to take whatever extra attention that I get, which Mike and I were just talking about how attention is critical in our modern politics. It is necessary to be able to influence politics, influence power, and have your priorities heard. One of my goals has always been to take whatever microphone that I'm uniquely offered because of unique aspects of who I am, and instead of talking about that, talking about and lifting up the needs of Delawareans and the needs of this state. And so I try to use that to our advantage, since we just have one.
That's great. When you list all the caucuses and whatever, and we talked earlier that you're a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, or a member of the Science, Space, and Tech Committee, which I'm glad you're that smart, because that would leave me out of that one. And you're also a deputy whip for
In Congress, it's a low bar, though.
You're also a deputy whip for the party, Democratic National Party. And you see and hear all this, everything else going on with your constituents maybe calling you. What's a typical day like? I mean, I just have this picture of you getting up and running till somebody says it's time to go to bed.
Well, no 2 days are identical, and but the days tend to fall into 2 different categories. If we are not in session, which are my favorite days, I'm back here in Delaware all day, and I'm typically with our state director, Brian Short, who was introduced earlier, and we're traveling around the state. We try to do our days by county, so we'll have a Newcastle County Day, a Kent County Day, a Sussex County Day. But when we're here, we're pretty much on the road all day long, and throughout that day, sometimes it's meeting with individual constituents, but a lot of times it's going and meeting with community groups, it's meeting with local chambers, it's meeting with small business owners, it's meeting with larger employers or really critical entities in the state. We've visited every hospital. I think we have our final visit today at St. Francis. And so we're meeting with business leaders, we're meeting with nonprofits that are on the front lines of serving Delawareans. We're talking to educators and nurses, and so it's really just a day. Every day is a day where we are out talking to Delawareans, and it really is not only energizing for me, it makes everything down in DC worth it when I get to spend that time here talking to folks. But it really does inform what we work on and what we engage on. We've introduced legislation as a byproduct of a meeting. So for instance, there was an egg farmer in Middletown, Mike Puglisi, who brought to our attention that there was a federal investment at the USDA around disease mitigation and prevention for for diseases that have an impact on farmers. And for reasons passing understanding, there was that was not being tapped for avian flu mitigation and prevention. And that was because in order to have a particular disease researched by that funding stream, it had to be articulated in statute in avian flu, which is a huge problem, and particularly a huge problem for Delaware, which has a massive poultry industry. That was not included. And so we introduced bipartisan legislation to tap tens of millions of dollars in federal medical research from the USDA to explore mitigation and prevention strategies around avian flu to protect our farmers and to lower the cost of poultry products at the grocery store, which see an increase in price when farmers have to call an entire stock because there's exposure to avian flu. And so we're working on getting that passed, but that's a byproduct of a conversation with a Delawarean here that our office had. When I'm in DC, my day is pretty much scheduled in 15 to 20 minute increments. We have a policy that if a Delawarean is visiting and they have scheduled a meeting with our office, if I am there, we will do as much as we can to make sure that that Delawarean meets with me. That's not always possible. Sometimes you're on the floor for votes, sometimes you have caucus meetings, sometimes you have committee meetings, but much of my day in Washington is actually spent meeting with Delawareans who are in Washington. And on top of that, it's committee meetings, it's going to the floor every week. I try to go to the floor to talk about either a major issue or significant accomplishments of Delawareans. And then on top of all of that, Brian leads a great team here in Delaware that I'm always engaged with that does constituent advocacy. I decided when you get elected to Congress, if you try to do everything and be everything, you're going to do and be nothing. You have to prioritize, and one of the first questions that a member-elect typically gets as they're thinking about building their staff and what they want to do is you got to set a major and a minor. And I decided that my major was going to be what they call local ombudsperson. Very present, very committed to the state or the district that you represent, and typically having a robust constituent advocacy operation is vital to that. And they are doing an incredible job, just an absolutely incredible job, not only getting and talking to Delawareans and hearing their needs, but then delivering for them. Typically, a constituent advocacy team will be able to return in a year a couple $100,000 to the constituents that they serve in the form of tax refunds that haven't been delivered, VA benefits that are being withheld, Social Security checks that are not being sent, or Social Security money that they're just intentionally withholding. We've been able over 9 months to get $3.5 million in the pockets of Delawareans who deserved that money from the federal government. So that's a big part of our focus, in addition to the policy, both the large-scale policy, but also the legislation that I've introduced.
Yeah. Sort of along those same lines, I know, at least what you read and see, congresspeople and senators are flooded with phone calls all the time from their constituents. I'm guessing that a lot of those calls are from the same people all the time too, but that may be a whole nother story.
There are definitely frequent flyers. That's definitely true.
Okay. Can you sort of tell what causes most of those calls to spike up or whatever, without it being maybe just somebody didn't like something the president had to say,
Yeah, so that's a great question. We have gotten, Brian, I'm not sure if I'm going to get this right, 50,000 outreach contacts to our office over the last 9 months. And sometimes that's what's called campaign outreach, which is a person, there's an organization, an advocacy group that's very passionate about X policy, and they create a draft letter, and you just sort of click a button and it sends it to the member of Congress. A significant portion is that, and then, but a pretty significant portion of the outreach we get are individualized messages or individualized calls, typically on very similar topics, and it depends on what's in the news. Obviously, right now, we're getting a lot about the shutdown and the conversations around the shutdown. We get a lot of calls from Delawareans who are frightened and scared and outraged by what they're seeing on the news and what they are seeing from the current administration. That is a significant number of calls. And again, that changes sort of based on the story of the day or the issue of the moment that folks are seeing. And then on top of that, it's obviously a smaller percentage of the outreach, but a pretty significant percentage of our time is the outreach that particularly the Delaware offices get around constituent advocacy. But it really varies, and we try to respond particularly as fast as we can to the individualized outreach that we get from folks.
Are there any particular projects in Delaware that are going on right now or that you see coming up that you particularly are trying to work on for Delawareans in Washington?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, one, as a member of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, a lot of the work that's happening at the STAR campus, I'm very excited about. And there is so much opportunity as a member of that committee to really lean in there. I'm also really excited about the opportunity for Delaware connected to that high-tech manufacturing across our state. One of the first things we had to do when the new administration came in and they were cutting off funding from a lot of different programs was there was a program called the Manufacturing Extension Program, which helps to fund and support small and medium-sized manufacturing companies, including in the high-tech manufacturing space. And this is a program that has helped to facilitate tens of millions of dollars in economic activity here in Delaware. It's a 50-state program. And every year, 10 states have a renewal of that program. And Delaware, alongside 9 other states, was up for renewal this year. The administration decided to stop that program, despite a larger stated effort to try to bring more high-tech manufacturing to the United States, to onshore more manufacturing jobs, including in that space. They decided to cut off the renewal of those 10 states in the beginning phases of phasing it out nationally, which we felt was a bad decision and a step that would essentially shoot ourselves in the foot when we're trying to onshore these jobs here. And so we brought together colleagues on both sides of the aisle, some behind the scenes outreach, some public outreach, toward the administration to not be partisan about, not score points, but to say, hey, y'all did this. Maybe you didn't really mean to do this, because we all share this belief in onshoring these jobs and building this industry. We were able to get the administration to reverse course on that and restore the funding for these programs. And I'm really excited about a lot of the opportunities that we're seeing here. There's a really great small business is it Magnolia? Was it Magnolia that we visited, or Camden? I think it was Magnolia. That's okay.
He thinks he's heard this before. I don't know.
There's a great small business in Magnolia that's really leading, is a leading business nationally. Yeah, exactly, Smari. That is doing sort of computer manufacturing for law enforcement in combating human trafficking. And they have become a global leader in this space. And it's this, probably less than 100 people in Magnolia. You would have no idea as you're passing by. It's in a converted barn. And they're leading the world in this particular area of high-tech manufacturing. And there are stories like that across Delaware that I'm particularly excited about, and particularly given my committee assignment, particularly eager to defend and maintain investment for.
Great. One question I wanted to get in, we did have a couple questions that were sent in earlier. This question, could you ask, and it ties exactly to what you did in Delaware as a state senator, what advice do you have for the club as we advocate for increased access to early childhood education? Any lessons learned from your paid family leave efforts in Delaware that you can carry forward in Washington?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I wanted to serve at the federal level is because I believe that for Delaware specifically, but for the United States writ large, we have to make it more affordable for young people to start families, raise children, and continue to work. We obviously have a workforce challenge, and we have a revenue challenge as a society, as we have an increasingly aging society, and not enough workers, taxpayers to fund Social Security, Medicare, or to staff our hospitals. And that's particularly true in Delaware, where we have a higher rate of an aging population, and especially true down in Sussex. And one of my goals has always been to make Delaware the best state to live, work, and raise a family in. And part of the way you do that is by building a cradle-through-career support system that lowers costs for families and improves outcomes for children. And there's sort of three big legs of that stool. One is paid family medical leave, the first 12 weeks of a child's life. Then after the first 12 weeks, but before kindergarten, it's early childhood education. And then after pre-K, once you get into kindergarten, it's making sure that every child here has a strong public education opportunity in their area that they can pursue. And early childhood education is probably the single biggest gap in terms of just not even the infrastructure there to keep up with need. And now our lieutenant governor is really focused on this. But the reality is we're going to need more revenue to build out that infrastructure. The market alone won't do it, especially if the population isn't yet there. So we're going to need an investment to do that. There are two ways for us to get that investment. One is in the state, it's new revenue, right? The other is federal investment. And the previous administration had put forward a proposal in the Build Back Better Act that would have resulted in federal investment in early childhood education that would have provided every child in this country affordable child care and universal pre-K. And it had a real chance of passing. That is a priority for me. I think that is an investment that the federal government should make. We should be responsible in how we spend money. We should be responsible in how we spend new money. But the previous administration had a proposal that was entirely paid for, so it wouldn't have increased the deficit or the debt, and it would have invested in all 50 states in the kind of early education infrastructure that we need. One of the reasons why I decided to run for federal office is because I believe that for Delaware to become that state that is attractive for young workers to live in and work in, we've got to address that crisis, that early childhood education crisis, without undermining our pre-existing competitive advantages, which is our low tax base, a low tax burden. And at the federal level, because we can invest, we can do that. Yes, we solve it for all 50 states, but if we solve the early childhood crisis for all 50 states while maintaining Delaware's low tax burden, that is going to allow us to be a destination for young people. And that's certainly what I'm focused on as the chair of the New Democrats Care Economy Task Force, including focusing on early ed. But what I would say is that what I saw in the paid leave fight was, one, there are opportunities for bipartisan collaboration. Both parties say they are pro-family. These are pro-family policies. And two, the business community is a critical validator in this. When we fought for paid family and medical leave, we were able to get the support of the State Chamber of Commerce. We negotiated, and there was compromise on both ends, but we were able to get the support of the State Chamber of Commerce. And on this, in the early childhood space, there is even more opportunity for not only bipartisan collaboration, but for a strong and loud business voice in the conversation. And I think if we do that, if we recognize that this is both compassionate and competitive national policy, then I think it can build the momentum necessary to get that federal investment needed for Delaware to do this without undermining all of the other strengths we have as a state.
Thank you. The bell is about to
Yes.
ring. I just wondered if you had one last quick comment on the shutdown.
Well, I will just say, I want to say two things. One, on the shutdown, and then I want to end on a hopeful note.
Okay. That's not a hopeful
Yeah,
note, right?
yeah. So the shutdown is terrible. Yesterday, thousands of Delawareans were furloughed from their jobs. If the shutdown lasts for more than a couple of weeks, people will have to go without pay. There are critical services and programs and benefits that Delawareans rely on, from the SBA to the VA, where people will see either delayed delivery of their services or benefits, or a complete stop to them while the shutdown occurs. It has very real and serious consequences for people, as does the current healthcare crisis that is occurring in this country, including right now letters that are going out to premium payers, to insurance holders, who are about to see, if they have plans under the Affordable Care Act, a doubling of their premium because of the expected expiration of the ACA tax credits at the end of the year. And so there's a crisis right now. I mean, people will not be able to afford that coverage. And so either they're gonna have to go into debt, or they're gonna lose their coverage entirely and be uninsured, and that's a dynamic that is not only dangerous and deadly for them, but all of us have to pay for. And so we have been, as Democrats, willing to negotiate from before day one. We've been willing to negotiate on this particular topic since August. We reached out. We've been stonewalled, unfortunately. We remain ready to negotiate with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to reopen the government and to address the healthcare crisis that we are currently in this moment. Unfortunately, we've not seen the same willingness on the other side of the aisle to actually come to the table and negotiate. You can't expect people to vote for something when their asks are not even being entertained. You cannot expect for people to negotiate or to vote for something when one of our asks, in addition to the health crisis, is that, quite simply, if Congress passes a budget, the administration spends the money appropriated by Congress in the fashion that it has appropriated it. That's not been happening over the last 9 months. And even senior Republicans have said, why would Democrats vote for a budget that they don't have faith will actually be implemented according to the text of the budget, according to the deal? And so we have some simple asks that senior Republicans have admitted are reasonable asks. We're just asking that those be entertained in a negotiation. And so hopefully folks will come to the table and be willing to engage with us. We don't go back until Tuesday, I think. The House has been out of session all week. I was down there on Monday and Tuesday because we were ready to negotiate to try to avoid the shutdown. But we remain at the table and ready for our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to come to it. I want to just say, because the through line of all of this conversation has been both the joy that I get in talking to Delawareans and the sort of partisan toxicity in our national politics. And one thing I just want to leave you with, because it is something that I am so grateful for in this job. And that is, one of the reasons why I love going out and talking to Delawareans is not only that Delawareans are really nice and lovely and wonderful and doing great things, it's that I get to see that as a state, which Delaware is a microcosm of the country, we are not as divided as the news or the algorithms make it seem. When you turn on TV or when you open social media, you are seeing a deeply engaged minority producing 100% of the content. And when you go out as an elected official and talk to people, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, you realize, yeah, there are real disagreements, maybe more disagreements than there used to be, but most people are fundamentally good and decent people. And there is a lot more that folks have in common than what separates them. And now more than ever, that has been needed to understand, that we need to understand that now more than ever, because increasingly what we see are extreme voices online that give us a false sense of reality. Social media and the news can impact reality, but it is not representative of it. And I am so grateful that I get to see that, because it gives me hope that persuasion is still possible, that the art of politics is still worthwhile and still possible. And I have to say, you know, there are so many reasons to be hopeless in this moment, but you cannot tell me that the reasons for hopelessness in this moment are greater than the reasons for hopelessness at any other point in history. And you have sent me to Washington, and every time I go onto the floor of the House of Representatives, and I just took my parents on the floor for the first time a couple of weeks ago. And when you are in there, the air is heavy with history. And you realize the challenges that this country has faced in the past. And you realize the challenges that my predecessors and that previous generations faced. And then you realize that despite all of those odds against them, challenges far greater than the ones we face right now, that in that space, our predecessors passed the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. And it's the place where women got the right to vote, and where the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were passed, where Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid were created. And you realize that this is a place that has the capacity for immense good and to have an immense impact. And I am so grateful that you have provided me that opportunity, not only to be there, but to be reminded of the possibilities in our politics when I'm out and about in Delaware, and the possibilities in our politics when I'm down in DC and on that floor and think about the history that's happened there. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks to you guys for being here. Thank you for leaving us on that positive message. And just what a wonderful session. Thanks for taking the time to be here. And thank you for doing what you do. As an expression of our appreciation and to note our club's ongoing commitment to early education, which you spoke of, we'll be donating a book in your name to one of our 5 community partners here in the state. I know the Congresswoman does have to leave here shortly. She's got a busy schedule, of course, but hopefully maybe just have a few minutes to stick around. But in any case, next week we look forward to welcoming Eric Kmek from Christiana Care Gene Editing Institute. And until then, take care of yourself, and if you can, someone else too.